What is going on, guys? It has been a week. Not complaining, just I have worked a lot of hours this week. In addition to my normal shifts at my second job, I've worked 5 additional shifts, well into the overtime. And I got to thinking, I recorded one of those episodes, a Patreon request, the most voted for of that selection was ammo apocalypse stuff. And I got to thinking after that, after I'd gotten a little bit of sleep, I got to thinking all the stuff that I had missed. And I thought, well, I'll go back and add some stuff in and do this and that. That was my thinking. And then I got to thinking about so much stuff, I thought, perhaps I should just do a whole other episode. So here we are. I'm not going to do a normal bio insert, because hopefully you're listening to this as part 2. My ammo philosophy, my kind of loadout gun ammo philosophy, right of apocalypse. It's kind of what I'm thinking about in this episode. So with that, I talked in the first part of this about deep down in the rabbit hole, all the things you could do to have ammo in the apocalypse. So what do I do? How do I prep? Because I am a prepper, I am a survivalist, military, law enforcement, hunter, competition shooter, and a survivalist, a prepper. I don't make any apologies for that. We're supposed to watch and be ready. I have seen in other countries, just normal functioning regular cities, descend into chaos. Literally the breakdown of social order and killing in the streets. I've seen that, not here in America as much, but I have seen my time in law enforcement and in large metropolitan areas, and being the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. Also dealt with riots and looting and civil unrest here in America. Not to the same degree, but I know how fast things can unravel once you start pulling that thread at the bottom of the sweater. Crazy fast. And I'd say if you're any kind of student of history, then you would agree that absolutely can happen here. It's not like we're in some kind of bubble. Here's my thing on that, my philosophy on that. Use the best tool for the job. Worry about problem number 1 first. I don't talk a lot about my war stories, my law enforcement stories. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get into like individual stories. I don't want to be that guy that's telling all kinds of war stories and stuff. But if you've ever had the displeasure of being in an encounter where you are pitted against somebody else and you are trying to kill each other, you don't want to handicap yourself. You don't want to, let's put it this way. I would never start a boxing match. I would never start a fighting hand-to-hand combat with one hand tied behind my back because, in round 3, I might break my finger. So I might as well just tie one hand behind my back now. And that's kind of how I feel about some of the options I talked about in part 1. I would never say, and I like revolvers, guys. Sometimes I'll carry like an ultralight 357 when I'm doing like wind sprints or something. But my day-to-day carry is a full-size fighting handgun. I would never go into the apocalypse with a revolver and say, well, this might be better on year 10 of the apocalypse. Therefore, I'm going to start carrying it on day 1. Because you got to survive to year 10, right? You got to treat every violent armed encounter like it could be your last. Like that guy is going to be doing everything he can to kill you, and you in return. That's a horrible enough, atrocious enough thing that you're never going to forget, no matter how many times it occurs. You don't need to be handicapping yourself and thinking about all these what ifs. Worry about problem number 1 first. Worry about surviving that violent armed encounter. Your next violent armed encounter, whether that's number 1 for you or number 10, the next one, bring everything you have to that fight. I would not handicap myself and let's say, bring a 6-shot revolver to the fight if I could bring an STI 2011 or a SIG 226 single action only. If it was a handgun, if I had to choose a handgun, I would never bring that handgun if I could have the option to bring, Benelli my Benelli M2 with number 4 buck, with a 3-inch Magnum number 4 buck. I would never bring my handgun unless there was some weird caveat like I was crawling through a tunnel or something. I would bring the best tool for the job. I wouldn't handicap myself. I wouldn't start off, carrying a bunch of black powder loads because, come the apocalypse when ammo runs out, maybe I'd be shooting black powder. Worry about problem number 1 first. If you don't survive your next violent armed encounter, then you're just a loot drop for somebody else to grab all your stuff, right? So that's my philosophy. Bring the best thing for the job. Now, I am a big fan of not being reliant on electronics. Now, I'll use electronics when they suit me because if the other guy is and I'm not, that puts me at a disadvantage. But I would never want my weapon system to be reliant on those electronics. Like, I'll use a white light. If batteries run out in the apocalypse and I can't recharge my flashlight, I'll throw it away. But until then, if I can use a flashlight or a white light and it's a tactical advantage, I'll use it. When it doesn't work, I'll throw it away. I would never want, let's say, an electronic optic where if the batteries went out, I couldn't sight in my gun. That's why I'm a big fan of backup iron sights. If I would run a red dot, red dots don't run forever. I don't care how much you think they do or how many hours of battery life you think that they have. In reality, that's far different. I would never just run a red dot on my rifle, but I would run a red dot on my rifle if I could have co-witness backup iron sights. That's generally how I'll run them. And then when my red dot stops working, I got a QD mount. I'll just rip it off and throw it away. I'll just take, a number 25 hex head. I can still see through it even when there's no dot, so it's not hindering me. When I get my first chance, I can just take it off, throw it away, and I still have iron sights. But until then, I'll use the red dot because the red dot is a force multiplier. I would, however, never just run a rifle with a red dot if I had any option. I would never set up a fighting rifle with just a red dot, thinking, the red dot's always going to work, because I've been there in the real world, and the red dot doesn't always work. Electronics don't always work. Case in point, I went to record this episode on my laptop, and my laptop didn't work because I'm literally in a winter storm warning, and it's so cold out that my laptop doesn't work. And I live off-grid, semi-off-grid. It just is what it is. Sometimes batteries get so cold they don't transmit. That is what it is. The cell phone was in my pocket, so it was warmer. It's working. So back up. That just to say, electronics don't always work. When they work, I'll use them. I'll take advantage of them, but I don't want to be reliant on them. You don't have to take my route. You could start off with a flintlock if you want. You could start off with, a 45-70, because in year 5, if you ask me if I had to use black powder, would I rather have a 45-70 or a 223? I would certainly rather have the 45-70, but that's way, way down in the rabbit hole. I'm not going to start off assuming I'm going to win every gunfight with a 45-70, with 1870s technology, or whenever the 45-70 came out. I'm not going to start off, with one hand tied behind my back because I might break my hand in round 3 of the fight. Got to make it to round 3. If I'm around that long, you got to imagine a lot of the population is gone, and I can, worry about that problem. Worry about getting another gun when the one that I have, when I no longer have ammunition for it. But I'm not going to start out with a subpar gun, a subpar choice. And I've talked about this before, but maybe it's been a while. Maybe I'll revisit it. I generally carry a full-size fighting handgun. My best go-to EDC right now, if I was choosing for this, is a SIG 226, legendary reliability, legendary gun, all kinds of environments all over the world, the SIG 226. It's one of my go-to EDC guns. It is cut for an optic. It is direct mounted with a Trijicon RMR, but it's the Trijicon RMR that works on radiation. As long as radiation's a thing, there you go. It's got a half-life, I think, of 14 years. So it'll still work in 14 years. It'll be half as bright. In 14 years, if the apocalypse happens tomorrow, I'll worry about it then. It'll still work. I can still shoot it. It still has co-witness iron sights. Even if it's 100 years, somebody picks it up, they can still use it with the iron sights. That's my number one pick for that. My number one pick for a long gun, if I was choosing for this scenario, is going to be if no other caveats, not like it's Mad Max or mass fighting in the streets or whatever. No other caveats. Like the duality of survival guns. I have to feed myself and defend myself. It's going to be a 12-gauge shotgun. I've talked about that ad nauseum before, but when it comes to feeding yourself, and I have to eat, you've probably heard my background before, I have to eat a lot more often than I have to get in gunfights. Even though I'm, employed as a private security contractor, I've done all the things I talked about in my bio. I have to eat far more often. When it comes to putting food on the table, nothing rivals a 12-gauge shotgun. Nothing can, take a mourning dove out of the air and stop a grizzly bear. And I do live in a state that has both black bear and grizzly bear and wolves and mountain lion and all the other things. And I live in the backcountry off-grid. So the 12-gauge shotgun, nothing rivals its versatility. Is the ammo heavy? Can I carry as much of it? Yeah, those are all downsides. But if I starve to death before I get to that point, before I run out of ammo, again, use what's best for the job first. If you give me enough caveats, maybe I choose like the 22 long rifle. But with no caveats, if you're asking my philosophy, 12-gauge. It would be, for that scenario, a Mossberg 590S, because I can shoot the short shells, especially with birdshot. They weigh less. I can carry more of them. I can carry a lot more of them. And I can go all the way up to like a 3-inch Magnum shell. I can go shoot slugs. I can shoot buckshot. Not with that shotgun, but I took my elk this year with a 12-gauge. I grew up hunting with a shotgun. Is it my preferred weapon if I'm going elk hunting? No, but I can do it. I did it this year. It can be done. Nothing rivals the versatility of the 12-gauge. It does have its downsides. I'm not pretending that it doesn't. If you want to choose something else, that's on you. But if you're asking me, I'd pick the 12-gauge. And if it comes to the point where, I can carry enough ammo with the 12-gauge that I can hunt and put food on the table for a long time. When it gets to the end of that point, then I'll worry about that problem then. But problem number one first, putting food on the table and surviving. If I'm in some kind of situation where I don't have easy access to food and I have to procure food, the 12-gauge is the best for that. As somebody that's growing up hunting, grew up as a poor boy in the South, I grew up with very cheap, inexpensive shotguns and putting food on the table. I don't think anything rivals the shotgun. There are certainly other situations where I'd rather have a different gun, but for a broad spectrum where I don't know if I'm going to see a grouse or a quail or a dove or a deer or an elk or whatever the case is, right? The shotgun will do all that. Maybe not as well in some circumstances, but it'll do it. That's why I picked the shotgun. If you said I had to pick a rifle, for me it would be the Scar 17. That's kind of my go-to. If I could only have one rifle, that's what it would be. It's a great fighting rifle. It's also in 308. If I'm picking one, if it was just like I'm out in the middle of nowhere in the boonies, I'd still pick a 308. It would probably be my Ruger scout rifle, my gun sight scout rifle. Stainless steel, controlled round feed, rugged, reliable. It's one of my go-to hunting rifles. It's not a semi-auto. It's not going to be a semi-auto. It's not a battle rifle. It's not going to be a battle rifle. It's a scout rifle. If I'm out in the middle of nowhere, which is where I live, and I bug out even further in the middle of nowhere, if that's my scenario, I might take the scout rifle in 308. So that's what caliber I would pick for that. If you put me in a real special niche scenario where like I was going out and I was never, ever, ever going to get resupplied with ammo, ever, which is a pretty big caveat, or I had to cover a lot, like I oftentimes will do security contracting work a long way from home. If I had to literally walk home, like the classic, EMP scenario, and I have to walk hundreds of miles, I'd probably take the 22. There's a reason I carry a takedown 22. I carry a couple of truck guns in the truck, but one of them is a takedown 1022. I can carry a lot of ammo and a lot of stuff in that takedown 1022. If I have to cover a lot of miles on foot, I still want my semi-auto fighting handgun in case somebody ambushes me close, but having a rifle like that where I can carry a lot of ammo and cover a lot of ground and it weighs very little, again, with different scenarios, that's what I would pick. If you're asking my philosophy on that. But I wouldn't start out with a handicap. Maybe if you wanted the option, if I'd, I wouldn't fault you for having another option, but I would choose the option that's best for the acute scenario. Maybe have an option for a chronic long-term scenario, but if you don't make it to the long-term, again, if you die in year one, doesn't really help you. I carry enough food in the truck that even if I had to go hundreds of miles on foot, I could probably carry enough food to make it. 22 would just kind of be a bonus. And I've done a lot of hunting with a 22. I've done a lot of hunting with a shotgun. If I'm starving to death and I haven't eaten in 3 days, I want the shotgun. Because if I get the chance at, a deer that jumps up 50 yards in front of me because I'm on the move, right? I'm not out there to hunt and sitting in a tree stand. If it's the apocalypse, I probably don't want to be in a tree stand while my wife is off alone somewhere, right? If I'm trying to move or do something else and I get a shot at a deer that jumps up a couple of yards away, I want the shotgun. If the only thing I see that day, which sometimes happens in the backcountry, the only thing I see that day is a grouse, then I want the shotgun. If it's a shot at a flying away grouse, I don't want the 22 in that. Can I hunt with a 22? Yes. Do I hunt with a 22? Yes. But if it comes to I have limited opportunities at food and I might literally starve to death, I want the shotgun for putting food on the table. If you give me enough scenarios like it's just a bonus and I'm trying to cover a lot of ground, maybe I take the 22. Now there's a reason I have a basic battery. But that's kind of my philosophy on it. Don't hamstring yourself. The 10-22, will it work in a tactical scenario? It will. Plenty of people have been killed with a 22, but it's not a 308. It's not a SCAR 17. If it's a battlefield type scenario, if it's like when I was in the fall of Baghdad, when Baghdad was going to a functioning modern city to a third world crap hole in a matter of days, I wouldn't want the 10-22 for that. I want a SCAR 17 for that, or maybe make the case for like an AR or an intermediate caliber battle rifle, something like that. But I certainly wouldn't want the 10-22 for that. It's not the right tool for the job. I would not hamstring myself and be like, well, the 10-22 would be better in this scenario, so that's just going to be my go-to, and pretend it's just as good as. Use the best tool for the job. Have a basic battery, and whatever, because I don't see the future. I don't pretend to see the future. I'm not telling you that my philosophy is best for you, but my thoughts are use the best tool for the job. And maybe don't hamstring yourself right off the bat. Don't start off, again, with one hand tied behind your back and you just become a loop drop for somebody else because you have some fantasy in your head of how you think stuff's going to play out. Use the best tool for the job so you can make it. And then worry about the problems as they come along, right? By God's grace, I'll survive and take things as they come. Worry about that day. One thing about being in war, being in combat, being on the streets as a cop in some of the nastiest cities in the country, you take that night for what it is. You take that day for what it is. One day at a time. You take it as it comes and don't try and pretend like you know what's going to happen next. You do the best you can with the scenario that's presented, and you go in that with the best tools that you have available for that situation. If I'll fight with whatever I have if I have to. If I have to take on two guys with an AK-47 and all I have is a 10-22, I'm going to bring it. I'm going to fight to my last breath, God willing. But I'm not going to choose that if I have a better choice, if that makes sense. If I have to take on a guy with an AK-47 and all I have is a sharp stick, I'm going to do it if that's what I have to do. But I'm not going to start out with a sharp stick, right? Start out with the best tool for the job, the best option available. And so that's kind of my philosophy on it. There are a lot of ways to get around making ammo and how to procure ammo and best calibers and this and that, but use the best tool for the job. And the reason I say 308, and this one might be different, like most people live east of the Mississippi. East of the Mississippi, I probably wouldn't choose a 308. Probably choose something else. The idea that you're going to hunt deer in the apocalypse east of the Mississippi, I think is kind of ironic because the population density there just doesn't make sense. There's a lot of deer there, but deer were hunted almost to extinction in the Great Depression. Look at what the population was in the 1930s versus what it is today. That's a people hive. And probably not a very good idea when everybody's out starving to death over a few deer for you to go out and try and hunt deer. Probably have food. It's probably not the time. So I might choose something else east of the Mississippi, but With the reason I would stick with like 5.56 or 308 is not because they're the best ballistically. They're not. They're not my favorite cartridges ballistically, but I often hunt with them and use them like 308, 30.6 because they're common and they're affordable to shoot. Like if you press me, I'd say like 284 Winchester is a better ballistic round than 308. But try finding 284 even at a store in good times. So common calibers that do the task well that you're looking for that you can practice with, because practicing and being good with a platform and being a good rifleman, all that stuff, that plays into it. If you think you're going to rise to the occasion in the apocalypse, you're just suddenly when the apocalypse happens, you're just going to be John Wick because you've seen a bunch of John Wick movies, right? I don't know. I wouldn't say don't eat a Tide Pod, but do something, whatever that ice bucket thing is. I don't have TV, but slap yourself into reality. That's not reality. You're going to be as good as you are with the tools that you have that you're good with now. So be good with them now. Practice, which means affordable common calibers. Without repeating myself, I think that pretty much gets across the main points in my philosophy for ammo, gun selection, loadouts, left of apocalypse and right of apocalypse, like before the event and after the event. And hopefully, we're called to watch and be ready, but I don't hope for bad things to happen, but I like to be prepared for when and if they do. With that, guys, keep your Bibles open and your powder dry, and have a blessed day.